Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Dream Unfinished YouTube show, our fourth episode. Today's show is going to be in two segments. We'll talk a little bit about Instruments for Change, which is learning about people and resources in the community that are doing wonderful, incredible work. And then our second segment will be our Yet Unheard segment. We'll talk a little bit about a lesser known masterwork by an underrepresented composer. My name is Sarah Overton. I'm the production manager for The Dream Unfinished, and I'm joined today by The Dream Unfinished's co-founder and executive director, En Lee. And I think before we begin just diving into today's episode, and I think have some things to share, some thoughts to share on the events happening yesterday in Atlanta. And do you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, so as for folks who may be watching this after today, so we are live right now on March 17th, 2021, and in the evening of March 16th, there was this shooting that took place across massage parlors in Atlanta, and all of these are still very much emerging details, but at the moment, most of the victims of this were Asian women. The gunman who's been apprehended, he claims that this was not racially motivated. He said something about like how he has a sexual addiction and that part of this spree was really sort of him kind of eradicating this within himself, and unfortunately these targets also happen to align against lines of race. So just warning everyone who may be joining us right now that like we are completely unscripted. It's because this is something that's happening in real time, and just given the fact that as we identify as an activist orchestra, we wanted to just, of course, acknowledge that that this is a devastating thing to have happened. Yeah, I mean, and I'll be honest with all of you. I first heard about this from a coworker, because as 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 many organizations are trying to mobilize around how to issue some kind of response or some kind of statement to all of this. It's a terrible loss, and I think it's really important for people to also be aware of how, first and foremost, that there must and need be solidarity across all lines. But then second, how this unfortunately falls into a broader trajectory, right? Like there has been this recent uptick in hate crimes and violence against Asian Americans, particularly in response to COVID. But then also this much larger trajectory of, not many people know this, but like Asian Americans were lynched during the 1800s. There is unfortunately the case of Vincent Chin, which happened in the 80s. For those who aren't aware, he was a Chinese American who was beaten to death, and it was by these two auto workers in Detroit. And the reason why they targeted him was because they associated him with the loss of American jobs going overseas and competitors with, the Nissans and the Toyotas and things like that. And the two most, well, number one, it is absolutely atrocious that any person was beaten to death. Number two, that was the first time that any sort of assault against an Asian American was prosecuted as a hate crime. So as I mentioned, there sure have been hate crimes against Asian Americans before the 1980s, but that was the very first legal, documentation of it, I guess. And then the third egregious thing is that the two men involved in the Vincent Chin case, I believe, either had very light jail sentences, if at all. You know, there was not an appropriate set of consequences considering the fact that a life was taken, and particularly in the way that it was taken. So, I mean, I was actually just in conversation with a colleague of mine about all of this, and I think people are often so quick to try to help, and that there is good instincts towards that. But there's also great value in space and in just kind of being able to collect one's thoughts. We will certainly share with the description to this video any links towards different kinds of resources where people can be reporting hate crimes that are specific to the Asian American community. And TDU will also just be taking a beat as far as, you know, as we've mobilized and made artistic statements in previous issues, how this can be something where we can also be speaking towards, but while at the same time, you know, just being sensitive to the fact that it's not about the knee-jerk reaction, but it's about however we can be serving a broader and larger and longer term conversation towards really finding ways of challenging how we see each other. Sarah, I don't know what you want to add, but please, by all means, however you want to reflect in my video diary entry that I just shared with the internet.
Oh, and really thank you for that, just for your reflection and for the space that TDU provides. I know that for a lot of musicians and artists, we find ourselves so often in this moment, like you said, wondering what can we do? And it's important to, yes, know that we have the space, but think, what can we do? And TDU is such a part of that response of what can be done. So to have this space not only to process, but then to eventually turn that process into action is so important. And knowing that this exists, knowing that TDU exists is just so, it's indicative of how music should be used. Music is expressive, and its own language, its own emotional language, really. And so I think just having this space is so important in the wake of, unfortunately, this horrific violence. And it's, yeah, I think that with violence like this too, you know, knowing that it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of strength to be able to take a deep breath and have space and wait and try not to have knee-jerk reactions. So you know, I think at this moment it's so important to take the time to grieve, to share with one another, you know, share emotions, share music, share thoughts with one another, and be open and be able to provide that space to everyone that you need, to everyone that you have this conversation with, to have that space to grieve, to think, before we, you know, move forward and think of ways that we can be actionable on this, that we can be helpful to other people on this. So yeah, that's all I'd like to add.
Yeah, I think, again, as we joke in many episodes, like, you and I are just two classical musicians, right? We are certainly not the end all be all on on most things, but we would be very glad to point people towards really great organizations, really great activists, journalists, authors, like other resources that folks can be learning about, as far as again, just like that whatever we're doing should not be a moment but part of a movement, and part of really this sort of lineage of activism and this legacy of these amazing people that have stood before us. Like I was able to read an essay um, a week ago. I still need to finish it, but it was by Grace Lee Boggs. And for folks who aren't familiar, very active civil rights activist. And the reason why I was particularly moved as far as the context of the speech that she had drafted was, I think she had issued it in like 2003 or 2008 or something like that. And it was part of this convening that she had helped to initiate that was all around how the arts can serve activism. And the site of this convening was Flint, Michigan. So to just think of, how prescient she was, fortunately and unfortunately, in this particular situation of the site of this. But then also, like, in some small way, that she was kind of predicting an organization like the Dream Unfinished without even realizing. And that, I've often referenced her, at least, but did not realize that she had such a clear through line to the art side of activism. So for people to know that Grace Lee Boggs was an Asian activist that was very much on the front lines for solidarity, for people to know about Helen Zia, who is, releasing books now, and it was like on PBS NewsHour a few days ago as a talking head around all of this, for people to know about Yuri Kochiyama, who was, I believe, cradling Malcolm X when he was assassinated. As we try to figure out what our response is to at least let people know that we certainly hope to point them towards these other resources, and to get that set of eyes around how this is really part of this broader picture of ways in which people from all different backgrounds can be supporting one another.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. We are here, and we are listening and thinking and having these conversations constantly. So I'm glad that we'll be able to move forward in this together.
Yeah. Well, and so if for our internet audience, if anyone's curious or interested in speaking even more personally with any of us on our team, please know that we're a resource. We're always interested to hear what people's thoughts or feedback is on these different kinds of topics. But we do have this scheduled show, and so we are going to proceed with this. And so again, we are not experts in things other than you on cello and me on a good day on clarinet. But I would put some money on the idea that Harriet Tubman would be all for interracial solidarity. And she is the topic of our episode today, not only in terms of just sharing some really surprising insights that we've been able to come across in this biography that our team has been reading, as well as this aria that is very much inspired by Tubman and comes from a larger work that's inspired by Tubman. So Sarah, if you want to take us to talking around veterans issues now, and we'll explain why Harriet Tubman matters to that.
Yeah. Quickly, I want to just acknowledge that we're not entirely sure when Harriet Tubman's birthday is, the exact date, but allegedly it was on March 15th. So happy belated birthday to Harriet Tubman. That kind of spurred our conversation for today. And as we were thinking about everything that everyone knows about this magnificent person, we're trying to find ways that we can highlight and show her and expand the person, the myth, the legend, and really think differently about that. So Harriet Tubman was in fact a veteran, and so we're going to talk a little bit about veteran services in the United States today. So most recently we had 3 News for the House and Senate Veterans Affairs Committee at the annual joint hearing on March 3rd. Leaders from the Minority Veterans of America and the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans sat for the first time with organizations that are invited each year to give their views on current veterans affairs. And we thought that it was so telling, in this moment, that this was the first time that those 2 particular organizations had a seat at the table, here. And related to Harriet Tubman too, vets and vets of color are often the marginalized of the marginalized groups. In 2014, minorities composed about 22% of the total veteran population in the United States. And in 2040, they're projected to make about 35.7% of all living veterans. Minority veterans are almost twice as likely to live in poverty as non-minority veterans at about 11% and 6% respectively. And veterans of any race and ethnicity are about 50% more likely to become homeless compared with all Americans. And that risk is even greater with veterans living in poverty and poor minority veterans. So it's we're thinking about just kind of how America is the track record of minority veterans in America, and especially after going to war or seeing combat, it's really difficult for veterans to get the help that they need. We're talking about service-connected disabilities here. In 2019, there were 1.66 million U.S. veterans who were listed to have a service-connected disability, and it's likely that number even is a little bit underrepresented. Recent studies say that about 60% of service-connected disability denials are denied in error. So people that need this service, need all of the benefits that come with service-connected disabilities, may be erroneously denied, and that appeals process takes up to 2 years on average. And this is a track record. This is something that happens consistently. Among World War I veterans, 85% of all disability claims were denied. And just knowing kind of how this history of treatment of veterans and veterans affairs has kind of progressed in this country. We're seeing a lot more attention on it now, on homelessness and homeless veterans specifically, and veterans of color. And we have a number of orgs that are, really helpful to veterans. There's the MVA, the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. Soldiers to Scholars is another wonderful organization that helps veterans kind of through the education pipeline. So when we think about Harriet Tubman and not only the tremendous obstacles that she had to overcome as a former enslaved person, kind of going through the Underground Railroad, rescuing and saving a lot of people and guiding people to freedom, she was also really prescient of the ways in which post-World War II veterans, particularly veterans of color, have been kind of let down and unsupported when they're transitioning back to civilian life. So she's, I think, is a really incredible example of a veteran and a military hero. And I know that you have some thoughts after reading her bio and reading this book on her. And I'd love to hear some of those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to just, again, as Sarah pointed out, that we know this sort of typical story around Harriet Tubman and like her biography as an abolitionist. But not many people are aware of really the kind of military service that she had. And so I have this great article that I just wanted to share really quickly from the Smithsonian. the first reason why I want to share it is, number one, it has a young photo of Harriet Tubman, which I think is just so powerful, because just to see, there's, I think the sort of legend of Harriet Tubman, often we see, the photos of her much later in her life when she's kind of like wizened and very petite and like kind of wrapped up in a shawl. Whereas here, like, you see, this was taken probably in her 40s. And you can see and imagine and sort of see in her facial expression too, like, yes, this woman risked everything 70 times to rescue others who were trapped in slavery. And yes, this woman had actually this extraordinary military service. So just to read a little bit more about it. So among many of the other things that she's done, she became the first woman in American history to lead a military assault. And the successful Combahee ferry raid freed more than 700 slaves in a chaotic scene. So just to give a little bit of background, I mean, in addition to like her nickname, often even before her military service, was as like General Tubman. That was actually John Brown's nickname for her,
Really?
because he wanted her to be a general with him during unfortunately his claim to fame. But then, she was very clearly identified because of the fact that really all of these more than 70 attempts, and successful attempts, I should say, successful forays when she was rescuing others, it made very clear that when the Civil War broke out, that she would be such an asset in terms of like espionage, in terms of an understanding of the territory, in terms of like, and just in having read this biography, which we should also actually drop in the description link afterward, Sarah, just like the sorts of things that she would have to do, like the ways that she would, how do I put this, like distract others who were potentially like on the very close heels of slaves that she was helping to escort. Her knowledge of like medicinal herbs in terms of different areas. So all of that was employed in her military service. And she worked as a nurse, she worked as a medic, she worked as a spy. And then here was where she really was, she led this military assault. And so I think first and foremost, to even just realize that the surprising parts of her history and how there's actually so much more richness to it that people don't necessarily get when you learn about Harriet Tubman in your history class and stuff like that. But then, so she does these incredible things for on behalf of the Union, correct? And then the thing that is really tricky is, and the reason why we tongue-in-cheek named our episode Harriet Tubman Secures the Bag, is it took her something like 35 years to get any kind of pension for her military service. Initially, what she had received was actually as a widow. So it wasn't even in recognition of anything that she had done. It was because her second husband had, I think, served in the military. But and like I have to, well, actually, I overlooked two very important details that I wanted to mention in the earlier part. One was that when Harriet Tubman, according to this biography, when Harriet Tubman was in the Civil War, being this nurse, being this medic, being this spy, for much of that, she was paying her own way to participate. She was at one point, I think, kind of given sums of like $200 or something here and there, which of course back in the 1800s was no small sum of money. But like she wasn't on any kind of payroll as a soldier or as a nurse or as an anything. She was actually, the more I read about her, she was just an incredibly entrepreneurial woman, frankly. And so she, in addition to all of these different kinds of activities, she was actually like, she had like a wash service, and she was making money from that so that she could pay her own way. She was like, she had set up like a kind of like like a food and beverage thing where she was like making like root beer and like baking things and like selling those so that she could be paying her way. So even for all of this extraordinary service, she like during the time of it, she wasn't really paid and remunerated properly. And then afterwards, like she had to go through this whole petitioning process over the span of about 35 years before she would be given any kind of, regular pension in recognition of her service. And the pension didn't even, that was one of the reasons why when there was all of that that publicity around potentially her face becoming the new face for the $20 bill. One of the reasons why that felt particularly poignant for a lot of folks was because the pension that she fought for 35 years was the amount of $20 a month. So that was one reason why people thought it was especially apropos. And yeah, I mean, I'm curious, Sarah, just like, do you have any sorts of reactions as far as this side of Harriet Tubman that people aren't often aware of?
I mean, it's just amazing to me. I think we were talking about this initially, and we were just saying the legend grows. I mean, what a person, just to do all of this and have this incredible passion, for others, this zest for life. I mean, just really, I think incredible, and just a figure in history that can't be any more celebrated. Or should be more celebrated, I think, rather. So I want to shift a little bit from talking about Harriet Tubman's life to just kind of how her life has been captured in music. So for our Yet Unheard section, we're going to touch on two different selections. We're going to talk about the aria I Am Moses the Liberator from Nkeiru Okoye's opera. And then we're going to just kind of think a little bit about how this myth kind of grew, the storytelling grew, throughout the opera as well. I want to note too that there's 3 operas actually composed about Harriet Tubman's life, but we really wanted to highlight these important selections. So Nkeiru Okoye was a Nigerian American composer who worked with strong.
She's very much alive.
Sorry. Is a Nigerian American composer, and she works with strong inclination towards storytelling. She talks, anywhere from Brer Rabbit to Greek mythology to historical figures, past and present, Phyllis Wheatley to Trayvon Martin, and one of her best known works is this opera, Harriet Tubman. And I know, and you had a little clip, I think, that you wanted to share from that opera as well.
Yeah, let me go ahead and just get that queued up to exactly where we need it, and let me share that now. Sorry, let me re-queue that up. My apologies. Here we go.
In the
So, I mean, that was only 2 minutes of it even, but yeah, it's, I think wow is right. I mean, so it should be noted that, and this is where we should actually share first, like what we've done in previous segments, like our definitions. So what we've heard is an aria. And Sarah, how would you define in like the dictionary definition of how people see an aria versus like other parts of an opera that people may not be aware of?
Yeah, I think when we talk about arias, it's sort of a spotlight on a singular vocalist, really. You have the full orchestra accompaniment, whereas sometimes you'll see in an opera, it's kind of like the vocalist is sing-speaking, which is more toward this idea of recitative. But in an aria, it's a full-on spotlight. That is that person's song. You've got the full orchestra going. That's their moment to shine. So this is very much an aria. I mean, oh my goodness, those vocals at the end, those, almost whistle tones there. Wow.
We should absolutely put all our hats off to Dr. Louise Toppin, who is a soloist there. So not only is she this magnificent soprano, truly scaling heights unimaginable, but she's actually also this really important scholar, particularly around Black musicology. And I think I remember actually hearing from someone, like maybe it was from Kyle Walker, but secretly she's a really phenomenal pianist too. So just like one of those like true triple threats that you should always be aware of and in awe of. But yeah, absolutely virtuosic demands of the soprano. And as you were saying, Sarah, in your definition of the aria, that often it is with this full orchestral accompaniment. And that's one of the things that I hear with this, that when I first heard this, and it should be noted that this opera that it comes from spans a very wide range of musical styles. I think that's one of the really compelling parts about Nkeiru's catalog. So there are some arias and some other musical selections that really sound very jazz or gospel influenced, but and very effective writing on those fronts. Here, it's like this big, grand, like I almost hear like old Hollywood film soundtracks. Like the scoring is just so lush and so like thick and rich, and so like the harmonies are so vertical. Like if I were to look at this on a score, I imagine that like really the full symphonic forces are being employed in these like blocks and chords of sounds. And I'm curious like how you heard that side of it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That grand Hollywood, type of just thick, lush, sort of Bernard Herrmann, type of orchestration. I thought it was so interesting because it was in the same mode as the spiritual "Let My People Go Down Moses," rather, "Go Down Moses, Let My People Go." And you could kind of hear some of that in the background in the orchestra. And then you had Dr. Toppin just kind of acting as this like soprano Moses, really in the foreground. Really, a lot going on there. I think a lot of symbolism, just really, really interesting, really interesting.
Well, and I so appreciate your pointing out the mode part, or for the non-musicians out there, the kind of melody that was selected, and the notes that were in the musical palette for this, because while it has this lush, thick orchestration, the melody itself, I heard it also just having like all the musical DNA of a spiritual. And I think that it's so fitting as far as like Harriet Tubman, her roots, her origin story are, about as humble as one could get. But her story and the life that she led in that trajectory absolutely deserves the full treatment of of a big opera and a big stage. And so it seems so fitting that I believe this is actually the closer for the opera. This is like the ending piece. Although from my study of how this project has really transformed, I mean, I believe Nkeiru had originally written this as a one-woman performance, and from there it became like a bigger orchestration, and then it even like shrunk down again for like a almost chamber opera rendition of it. So she's been living with this project for a number of years, but through all of it, it's this idea that Harriet Tubman's story is it's really, it requires this big art form to contain it. And so for the music to also be a reflection of that, I think, and that like we're taking this spiritual like melody, but then giving it this grand lush treatment, I think is the perfect homage to all the ways in which we can be paying tribute to Harriet Tubman. So, you know, we want to definitely point people towards the SoundCloud that we just flashed, where you could hear the full aria itself, and to be aware that this is part of a 2.5-hour evening length work, and that you could get the sheet music for the vocal score for this. So for any particularly ambitious sopranos out there who think that you too can scale those same notes that Dr. Toppin did, you can hazard them yourself, but by all means, please do, because this is great music that needs to be performed more. And yeah, so I think that and I think it also bears mentioning that I'm so glad that you brought up specifically the Go Down Moses, because in reading this biography, there's a lot of somewhat perhaps apocryphal mentions of how music played a role in Harriet Tubman's life, like that fairy raid that we mentioned that she had led. Allegedly, I remember, Sarah, when I was telling you the story, we were both kind of like, we don't really believe this. But allegedly, as a part of how she was freeing these 700 slaves. So it was in an area of the South where the Gullah dialect was much more prominent, and she did not speak it. And there were real issues as far as like, as they were trying to free this this particular site, that they weren't able to communicate with the slaves that they were freeing. There was a lot of panic. And so the way the story goes, the way Harriet Tubman told the story was that she started singing some of these melodies and songs that were very popular during this era of abolition. And the slaves were actually singing it back to her. And that was a way where she was kind of able to settle everyone and bring some amount of order to the chaos that was ensuing. And so I remember you and I kind of like raising our eyebrows around it. But in reading this biography, she cites music quite a bit. And actually, one of the things that she mentions is when she would have to, you know, when she was working and working to rescue slaves, and she would have them hidden in some location, like deep in a grove or a forest or something like that. She would use musical signals as a way for them to know when the coast was clear, or when they would actually be able to, you know, come out and then go on to the next leg of their journey. And one of the things that she mentions was that she would sing a particular verse from Go Down Moses, and that was the all clear signal for them to be able to come out.
Oh, interesting. And you know, what's so interesting about you saying that is, and I guess this is just expanding on the myth, that I heard that some of those things were bird calls, some of the things that she would, you know, put together to cue people to move forward along the rail, or were bird calls. And that's what that soprano line really reminded me of, right there at the end. All of those high-pitched notes, all of those whistle tones reminded me a little bit of a bird call. You know, so I think it's so interesting to just kind of have all of these elements thrown in there, or that you may perceive are thrown in there.
Yeah. I mean, from everything I've read, Nkeiru has really been immersing herself in the story of Harriet Tubman. So for all we know, our conjectures are even a part of what she had in mind when she was composing this. And also maybe she just wanted to have this like showstopper at the end for a soprano, which, you know, and any good opera composer would want to have put in place. So, yeah, so I think, you know, what a piece, what a story. And just for folks to be aware that the myth, the legend of Harriet Tubman, you know, she's full of surprises, so people should expect that we'll be revisiting other parts of her story that are lesser known in future episodes. But with that, I think this is the close of today's episode. And to make sure that, again, in terms of like our housekeeping, that, you know, all of those organizations that we had identified at the top of the show, Minority Veterans of America, and those coalitions and whatnot, we'll be making sure to share those links, as well as the links to get to the music that we were just featuring and talking about. And otherwise, you know, we want to really just remind people that with the story of Harriet Tubman, that and juxtaposing that with veterans issues now, that, you know, often if history doesn't exactly, like, what's that quote? Like, if history doesn't exactly repeat itself, it often rhymes, right? And so how we can make sure to keep that in mind, as, you know, what veterans are going through now is that we need to be doing better. Like what it should not have taken Harriet Tubman 35 years to get her pension. It should not have taken this long for Minority Veterans of America to be able to sit in a session on veterans issues. So whatever that we collectively can be doing towards being instruments for change ourselves, you know, that's, I think, the ultimate ambition with the kind of work that we're doing here at TDU.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And thank you for closing us out that way. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, encourage people to come back next week as we just kind of continue exploring activism, instruments for change, and classical music. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and comment and tell us kind of your thoughts on everything that we shared today. We read every single comment and we would love to hear from you. But we'll hope to see you next week as we continue this journey together. So thank you all so much.